In today's episode, I'll be sharing 5 steps to setting up a successful block center in your classroom. Having a well-organized, well-equipped, and clearly labeled block center will help increase student engagement and keep your students on task for longer periods of time. Of course, there are many other centers in a high-quality early childhood classroom in addition to the block center, and there are lots of factors that go into a successful center time routine, but we're going to address those in other upcoming episodes. So be sure that you're subscribed so you'll receive a notification every time a new episode is posted. And that brings me to step 1. So step 1 is to select your center materials carefully. And now I'm going to flip the camera around and we're going to take a look at some of the materials that I prefer to keep in my own block center. Now, if you have other ideas for things to keep in a block center, make sure you leave a comment right below this video if you're one of our viewers. And if you're a listener, you can go ahead and leave a comment on the blog post that goes along with this episode. So the first thing I'd like you to consider when it comes to selecting materials for the block center is to think outside the box and also to remember that not everything in your block center has to come from the store. So here on the screen, if you're watching along, our viewers can see I have some wood slices here. I purchased these wood slices on Amazon. Of course, they're super cool for a science center too, but these are all sliced very precisely and they make great, like you can create little stairs with them because they're wide. Look at that's a spiral staircase I'm making with these. Kids love to build with these, and they are also a natural element that you can keep in your block center. Just a word of caution, if you yourself or any of your students have allergies to trees, then you're going to want to be careful with these. When I first put them in my classroom, they smelled very strongly of sap. And apparently I was allergic to that and it caused me great allergies. So I set them outside in the hot Texas sun for like a day or so and they dried out and I didn't have that problem anymore. But just FYI, in case that's an issue for you or your students. So wood slices, that's one thing. Another thing are rocks. Now you can go outside and find lots of rock. I purchased these at I think a craft store, I want to say, because they're really nice and smooth and flat and the children can build things with them as well. I mean, you can make a little bridge. I have some craft sticks with these flat, like stones almost. You can create all kinds of things using craft sticks, or sometimes we call these popsicle sticks here in the US. That's a brand name, but it's also kind of become synonymous with the actual thing. But these craft sticks can be used along with your rocks and your wood slices. Kids can build bridges and staircases and all kinds of cool things. And also twigs or sticks, if you will. Now, of course, you can always find sticks outside. Again, I was worried about sharp edges or allergies or something, so I bought these also at the craft store. Again, they were super cheap. It was nothing like buying a set of blocks or anything like that. I think for a couple of bucks. I have a gigantic bag of sticks. I do not keep them all in the block center because it would be too many. I have them stored in a little just a little plastic tub from the dollar store. And I put a label on this little tub. And this is mini. You can see that this thing isn't much bigger than my hand. And I have it filled with sticks. And I also have a tub where I keep the wood slices and the craft sticks. And I have another little tub like this one where I keep the rocks. And this is not a natural item, obviously. It's a little shot glass, but it is plastic, and you can find these in different colors. And quite often I use these at the light table, colored versions. And they also are great for building and stacking and creating and doing all kinds of fun stuff with in the classroom. So some of these items I would consider found objects or loose parts that you could use. They were not intended to be used in the block center when they were created or grown from the earth in some cases, but they allow the children, or they promote rather, curiosity and problem solving and exploration, open-ended play, all that good stuff. So very inexpensive things here. These little shot glasses were the ones I found most recently at, I believe, the Dollar Tree. And there was a ton of these little shot glasses in one package for $1. So if they break, it doesn't matter. These other items are also either very inexpensive or you can source them outdoors. So definitely consider thinking outside the box when it comes to your block center. Another thing I like to have in my block center are vehicles of some sort and traffic signs. And the vehicles, now I know that there is a big push for natural objects in the classroom these days, but I tend to be a realist. And if we want things that are going to last, right? Because we know that we don't get money very often in the classroom. If we want them to last, they have to be super, super sturdy. And I dislike using the wooden cars and trucks or vehicles, if you will, because quite often they're painted and the paint chips off. And it also worries me that I don't know if the paint is lead-based. Like, I don't know what kind of paint that is. Is some kid getting in that paint in his or her mouth if they accidentally put the item in their mouth? I'm not really sure. These plastic ones can be sanitized. And as we know, in the last couple of years, sanitizing everything has become a very big deal. More important now than ever before. So these can actually go in your dishwasher. Some of the cars and vehicles that I'm showing you, if you're watching along with us, are from Green Toys. I tend to like their products right now because they're very sturdy. So yeah, there's some of those vehicles in here, and these just happen to be mostly community vehicles right now. So there's like a set of these Green Toys community vehicles, but there's also some that I got from the Target dollar spot a few years ago. I believe that's where these came from. So I have a box of vehicles in my block center. I keep them out all the time. I can add vehicles to it if I want to rotate out some things, but the vehicle box is always there because what do we know about kids in the block center? They like to build stuff and they like to play cars in there. And then of course, the traffic signs. And you can get traffic signs, these little traffic signs to go along with your cars in your block center. You can get them in a lot of different places. I know that Target had them not too long ago. I want to say last year or the year before. There's a whole bunch of these, but it's important that they're sturdy because they will get a lot of heavy use. And again, when they're painted wood like this, I don't know if you're watching along, if you can see, but they tend to get discolored because kids are banging cars into them and they play rough in this center. So I try to get the most sturdy ones I can find. You can see these are really thick wood. And I like to have a large variety of signs in there so kids can practice their environmental print and concepts of print. A bin of cars or vehicles, and I have a bin of traffic signs. And then I also have larger vehicles. So vehicles that won't fit in one of those plastic tubs. And again, this is, I'm going to try and hold it up to the screen for our viewers, Green Toys brand. I love this brand because it is super sturdy. Their colors tend to not, this one is probably the most bright one they have, but their colors tend to be soft and muted and not like shouting really loudly at you. And this obviously is a dump truck. I bought a set of 3 of these. I really like the size. It fits, look, it fits in my hands very nicely, right? So you can imagine in a child's hands, this is larger than a normal vehicle, but it is just the right size for little kids. It's not too big. I feel like a lot of those larger dump trucks and fire trucks are almost too big for our kids. And each one has a little driver of the vehicle as well that sits right in there. I'm showing you the dump truck because it is the most popular one in the block center because the kids can fill it up and dump it out. So I have a set of 3 of these that go in my block center. I think there's a cement truck, a bulldozer, and the dump truck, and they came as a set. Again, that's Green Toys. And I don't work for this company. I just know that people will ask. So I wanted to make sure that you had all that information. And another thing that I wanted to show you, I'm going to try and tilt it up without everything falling out. And there it goes. Are the labels that are on the end of the tub. And Every tub has a label on one end. Ideally, it would also have a label on the other end. As you can see, this one does not, because it's just my demonstration tub for you. And these little clear plastic pockets came from the Target dollar spot a couple of years ago. Not recently, but you never know. They tend to have them out whenever they put out school supply type stuff. So the clear plastic holder, the labels themselves come in my classroom label pack, and I will make sure that there is a link to that for you in the show notes or the blog post if you are reading along or listening along. So every single bin in the Block Center has a label on each end and a label on the shelf so the kids know where it goes when they're done. And when they go to put that bucket or tub or bin, whatever you call it, on the shelf, they just have to look at the label on the end and then match it to the one on the shelf. And it doesn't matter if they have the bin facing this way or that way, there's a label on each end. So that makes them 100% successful all the time. And next up, we have people. And I remember when I first started teaching preschool, not every Block Center that I came across had people in it. But because I worked exclusively with second language or dual language learners, I learned really quickly that little kids will lend voice to little people or dolls. And it's super important to provide people because in order to play vehicles, people drive vehicles, right? So we need people in the Block Center. There's always people in my Block Center. Even my most reluctant speakers, right? My kids who maybe are afraid to speak, quiet, shy, whatever, they will pick up the little people just so naturally and start talking with them. And it doesn't matter to me if they're practicing whatever language they're talking in, because that's not the important thing. The important thing is that they are practicing oral language skills. And you know, I like to teach cheap. If you've been watching this or listening to this podcast for any length of time or following me on my blog, you know that there are some things I think we should spend money on in the classroom, or that our program should provide for us ideally, and some things that can be found at the dollar store. And I already shared some of those things with you that were inexpensive. These are the little people from Lakeshore, and I think they are worth every single penny. If you're watching along, you can see, I don't know if you can or not, the little Lakeshore stamp on their feet. This set is, I love it. It's diverse. So there is a diverse set of people in here, and I will show you how diverse they are. Females and males, and there's skin tones, and the kids of different ages. The only thing I don't like is that all the girls appear to be in dresses, but I was able to get past that. But see, you have babies, kids of different skin tones. You've got adults. This is a humongous set. I believe I just bought one set and all these kids were in it, all these people. You can see this one still has its legs bent because it was driving the car not too long ago. So there's a lot of people in this set. And these people they're plastic. And they also have, as you can see, flexible extremities, arms and legs, a little bit flexible. You can see this is as far down as this guy's legs will bend, and but they will stand up. And you might also notice that I have material or cloth in the bin with the people as well. And one thing that I show kids how to do, these are just squares. I think they're called quilting squares. I'm not really sure, but I found them at the craft store. They were cheap. But fabric, you can wrap the babies up. You can create beds and curtains and furniture, all kinds of things you can do with fabric. I've had kids create, they take the blue fabric and they'll put it on the floor and they'll create a lake. And they're going to go to a picnic at the lake. I've had them have their people ice skate on the lake. All kinds of things. They make dresses out of them. I've had kids wrap the little children in fabric and say she has a new dress or she's going to a party, things like that. So I like to put fabric in there, anything that can promote them to use their imagination. And then of course they lend voice to the people and have them talk to each other. So these people, again, are from Lakeshore. And while I do like to teach cheap, sometimes there are things that are worth investing money in. Of course, it's best if your program purchases them for you, but if you're purchasing them out of pocket, I highly recommend these people, these diverse people from Lakeshore. And I just realized I forgot to show you this other semi-natural object that I keep in my block center, and these are leaves from a fake plant. Now, of course, you could always get real leaves from outside, but for somebody like me who has a lot of environmental allergies, especially to leaves and mold, did you know that leaves mold? Yes. I can't have real leaves in the classroom. So these fake leaves, I bought a fake plant at the dollar store, and now we have fake leaves. And it's really fun to see the kids build things with the sticks and the rocks and the craft sticks and the twigs and the leaves, and to build like a jungle habitat. Sometimes I'll put wild animals out there, or they do all kinds of wild things with these natural objects. And the great thing about fake plants is that, well, first of all, they don't turn brown and wither away, but they also are super inexpensive, and they're very durable. They can withstand a lot of use, right? Because they're plastic. So, and they can also be disinfected, which is another great thing. Label on the end of the tub. So that brings me to blocks. And a lot of people ask me about the blocks that I like in the classroom. And now, if you work for a proprietary program that shall remain nameless, you may be required to use wooden blocks, and that's great. But once again, I'm a realist. And when you have more than 20 children in a classroom by yourself, and you're trying to have all the centers like you're required to do, having the blocks be real wood when you've got 6 to 10 kids in there at one time using them becomes a safety hazard. So I switched to using foam blocks because they're still building with them. These are exactly the same as wooden blocks. They are foam. I used to have the primary colored ones until they came out with these wood grain ones, and I quickly switched to these. These are awesome. Kids love these blocks just as much as real blocks. They come in all the same shapes and sizes, and this set is from Lakeshore. Once again, there are certain things I believe we should invest in, or our programs rather should invest in for us, and certain things you can find at the dollar store. So these blocks are certainly one of my must-haves for the classroom. I don't work with Lakeshore. They don't pay me to say these things, but hey, Lakeshore, if you're listening, let's talk. So anyway, these are my foam blocks that I love, my kids love. They make cleanup much quieter, and cleanup goes quickly and easily. You will need several sets of these if you're going to have them for your full class. Pictured here is just 1/3 of the set that I have, but you're going to need several sets for a full class of kids, and of course, labeled on the end. And now if you work in one of those programs that uses that proprietary curriculum with all kinds of requirements, you'll know that keeping blocks in a tub like this is against their rules, if you will, because we want kids to be looking at the shapes and matching them to the shapes that you have on your shelves. And that is fantastic. Again, not realistic when you have such a large class, and it makes cleanup time go really slowly when they're trying to put all those blocks away just right. So I found that for me personally, since I didn't work in a program that used that proprietary curriculum, if you know what it is and you use it, then you know. And if you don't, then don't worry about it. But I like to have them in a tub. It makes cleanup go quick and easy. They throw the blocks in the tub. The tubs are open on the top. It makes cleanup much, much easier. And of course, they're labeled on the end. So next up, we have clipboards and blank paper. And I know you're thinking, Vanessa, why on earth would I put that in the block center? And I'll tell you why. First of all, kids love a good clipboard. These are half-size ones that you see here on the screen. I think I got these on Amazon. And what do you know that your kids do all the time in the block center? They build something and they say, don't touch it. Well, if you don't want anyone to touch it, then let's make a sign here that tells our friends not to touch it. Now I'm writing, if you're watching along, I'm writing. Kids can't write, so you could put a little thing on the wall, like a little sentence strip that says do not touch, and then they can copy that. They can create their own signs, they can create blueprints, they can write notes, all kinds of cool things. So I put some crayons and some pencils there as well. Now, of course, this isn't something they're just going to start doing. You have to model it for them. You have to show them what the purpose is. You have to call their attention to it. Another thing that I always have in every center is my center sign. The center signs serve two purposes. The picture is for the children and the words are for the adults, whether those adults are parents, administrators, or anybody in your classroom, to tell them what we are learning in that center, because so often other adults don't understand the importance of what it is we're doing during center time. So those are in my shop. We'll put a link in the show notes and in the blog post for this episode. So that brings me to books. I know you're also thinking, Vanessa, my kids don't go to the Block Center to look at books, and you would be 100% correct. But what we want to do is to bring literacy into every center. That's why I had the clipboards and the writing tools there. We also want to bring books into the center, and I teach the children how to use the books in the Block Center as reference. So if they're trying to build something and I know that there's a book about it in the Block Center, then I'll tell them to look in here. These books are great. These are Heinemann Learn and Read, and they're all about different construction vehicles, things like that. I have the whole series of those. There's all kinds of great books in here. And I just collect these, you know, so if they're making trains, oh, that's an airplane, but if they're making trains, I saw a book about trains back here. There's books actually about block centers, about Block City, right? There's a Block City, that's a good book. Oh, here's some more great books about construction, but Pebble Plus. I'm not sure all of these are still in print, but you can see these are great for little kids. There's the one about trains I saw, because they don't have a lot of words, but they have very vibrant full color photographs. And dump trucks, this would be a good one to go along with the dump truck that I showed you earlier. You could draw your kids' attention to that. But I have a whole box of books, and some of them are board books because these books do get, beat up because they're in a very high traffic, high interest center. You can start putting books of your choosing into your book box. This is probably too many books, to be honest, now that I'm looking at it under a microscope here. But I have all the books. Ideally, all the books in this box have a sticker with the letter T on it. And I forget why I have the T, but I think they're for transportation. And every book has the sticker, and then my label also on the box also has that same sticker. So they know that these books go into this box, but it's also, it's in the Block Center. So it's kind of intuitive. But I keep my favorite books about blocks in here for the kids. These, of course, are books that I allow them to touch and interact with, and that's why some are board books. But it's very important to bring literacy into every single center, but also show them what they can do with these books. So if they're using the dump truck, say, I wonder if there's anything that dump trucks do that you could learn about in this book. Oh, look, maybe they could build something to go with their dump truck, or gives them ideas. So books in the Block Center. So I kind of skipped ahead of myself because step number 2 was supposed to be all about labels. So it is so simple, but it's so important because labels in your center can make or break your cleanup time in the Block Center. So this is where a lot of teachers take a misstep. So listen up, because labels on both ends of the tub and the shelf make such a world of difference when it comes to cleaning up that it's so worth it. It's so worth the investment of your time up front to cut the labels out, to put them on, and so forth. Now, of course, members of our Teaching Trailblazers mentorship program have access to the labels that I showed you when I was demonstrating the materials that I like to to keep in my block center. But you can also take pictures with your phone of the items that are in your block center. Just lay them out on a table, like lay all the trucks and cars out on a table, take a photograph of them on your phone, and then you can print that out and use that as a label along with the words. I think it's very important to have the words on the labels as well to add to that print-rich environment. And of course, the words need to be in a very easily read font that closely resembles, handwriting, the writing that we use, the stick and ball letters. Talking about labels brings up a good topic, and it's a question I get quite often is, well, how do you get the labels off? And to be honest, I don't care because labels are not the most important thing. My job isn't to keep the furniture looking sparkly brand new, right? This is where you have to decide on what your priorities are, right? Is your priority to keep the furniture looking sparkling, fresh, and new, or is your priority to have clearly organized and well-defined and labeled centers to set your kids up for success and problem solve and all of those good things that come with center time? Which one is your priority? Now, if you own the furniture yourself, you have a vested interest in, getting the things off without harming the furniture. So this is what I like to call the cost of doing kid business, right? So I've used Glue Gun to get off the labels before. I've scraped the labels off with a putty knife, but mostly, to be honest, I just slap another label on top of the old label and tape it down. It works just fine. And I really think it's all about priorities. That brings me to step 3, and that is adding things to complement the themes to keep interest in your block center high. Because a question I get asked most often is, how often do you change out the things in the block center? So all of the things I talked about already stay in the block center all year long. Now, I don't start out with all of those on the shelves in the block center on the first day. That would be very bad. So I start putting things out slowly, one at a time, and then eventually we build up to all the things that I already talked about, but I add things to the center to complement the theme. So for example, books that go along with the theme, right? So if we were doing a farm theme, I would make sure that there were specific books about tractors and farm machinery and things like that. Fire trucks during a community theme, wild animals during a wild animal theme, things like that. And another important thing to remember is if you're adding things to a center, don't forget to introduce those new additions to your students. So I'd usually do that on Monday. If I had added a barn to the block center and some farm animals, I would just really quickly call attention to it, saying, as we were getting ready to go to centers, now I've put a barn over there with some farm animals because we're learning about the farm this week. Remember, we just read a book about the farm. So I want you to be thinking about what you can do with those things when you're in the block center this week. So very simple. If I have a specific place for those to go, I will show them. So I will have a barn label where I put the barn. And so I'll say, and remember, the barn goes here. And it's so funny because by the time we get to the farm theme, my kids already know where everything goes in that center. And so during cleanup time, if I've forgotten to do it, they will say, well, where does this go? Like, there's no place in the block center for this. So they'll remind me. So that brings me to step 4, which is space. Since the block center is super high interest, you're going to want to make sure that you have enough space for your students to spread out and really engage in building and exploring in this center. So how much space do you really need? Well, I'll tell you this. What I found over the years was that when I used my circle time area, that's your whole group area, right? When you do your read aloud and all that, when I used that area as my block center, it was the most successful because I've taught in a lot of different classrooms in a lot of different school buildings and a lot of different places over my 20 plus years. And I found that having that large circle time rug as the area for the block center was the most successful for me. And we didn't use the circle time area very much when we had centers. I had the block center located there. So I just had my block shelf with all the things that I showed you on that shelf very close to that rug. And that rug was their boundary, right? Because we need to very clearly define the boundaries Otherwise, they end up going everywhere, especially when you have vehicles, because vehicles tend to roll. Can't tell you how many times I've tripped over a vehicle during center time because it rolled out of the block center. So having that rug to clearly define the space is super helpful. I've been in situations before where I didn't have a circle time rug and I used tape. Don't tell the janitor. But you have to have some clearly defined boundaries. Now, your center, your block center is too small when kids are bumping into each other and their buildings are getting knocked over excessively. Now, that's going to happen normally, but like excessively, and the play is constantly spilling out into other areas of the classroom. That's when it's too small. And I've been in classrooms where my block center was too small because my classroom was too small and I had too many kids. Another thing to consider when it comes to setting up your block center, aside from having enough space, is where will it be located? So one of the best things that I learned over the years was having my block center located very close to my dramatic play center, right? Because those are two of the highest interest centers in the classroom, right? And they're also very noisy because they promote a lot of activity and language and interaction. And so having them located together, we call these the noisy centers, having them located in the classroom near each other is super helpful to keep all that high energy and loud voices in one area. And that brings me to the final step in this 5-step process, and that is managing students in the block center. So this is by far one of the questions I receive the most often about centers. There is no one right or wrong way to do this, in my opinion. Now, if you work in a program that uses that certain proprietary curricula that shall not be named, then the choice is not yours. You must have free choice centers all the time. I agree that free choice is the absolute best method for running centers because it offers children choices and opportunities for problem solving. There is nothing more motivating to a child than making their own choices. And there is no better way to support the development of problem solving skills in the early childhood classroom than for children to figure out how to share space and materials, right? But I'm also a realist because some public pre-K programs don't fall under childcare licensing guidelines, right? And they cram as many little kids into a classroom as they possibly can, which is the case in Texas, where I spent most of my teaching career. There's no class size cap for pre-K there. This decision was left up to the public school districts, the local school districts. And the state gives school districts money for each child that's enrolled. Now, some districts prefer to accept every child despite their room or lack thereof of room. And all that to say that if you have more than 20 kids in a classroom, and especially if you don't have an assistant, which also isn't required in some public pre-K programs, then you're going to need to do some crowd control. Okay. Now, I'm not talking old school forced rotations where you ring a bell or flick the lights on and off and have the kids put their hands on their head so you can tell them where to go next. No, that's totally not best practice in the classroom. I'm talking about still giving your students free choice, but grouping your centers into quadrants in your classroom and then grouping your kids into groups, allowing them to choose freely from each different quadrant in the classroom. Is it ideal? No, of course not. But it's the reality. And it's the reality that many public pre-K teachers face. We cannot create a utopia in the classroom if we don't work in a utopia, right? So bottom line when it comes to managing your block center is that free choice is best if you're able. And if you're battling enormous class sizes with limited help, then do the very best you can with the situation that you're in. And I kind of think of it like the pandemic, right? Everybody knows that virtual learning is absolutely not the best way for preschool children to learn. Yet we had to do the best we could in an impossible situation. So there you have it. My secret recipe, my 5-step process for a successful block center set up in your classroom. Now, if you want to learn more about setting up successful centers in your classroom, then you're going to want to grab a copy of my free Center Essentials Guide. It walks you through step by step setting up every single center in your classroom with pictures and material lists. And you can find a link to this freebie in the show notes if you're watching along, and if you're listening along, you can find it on the blog. Type Center Essentials into the search box at pre-kpages.com. I hope you got some ideas that you can take away and use in your classroom right away. Until next time, I'm Vanessa Levin. Onward and upward.